Mason Doyle's phone buzzed as he pulled into the driveway of his two-story colonial. The emergency call from the Riverside Mall project had ended 3 hours early, a blessing considering the concrete pour had been scheduled to run until midnight. He killed the engine of his F-250 and sat for a moment, savoring the rare opportunity to surprise Lila. The house sat dark except for the blue glow from the living room TV. Strange, Lila's Honda wasn't in the garage. Mason checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. Her prenatal appointment with Dr. Morrison had been at 6:30. She should have been home by now, probably complaining about the wait time and craving ice cream like she had with Callie 14 years ago. He pushed through the side door, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter. "Lila, you upstairs?" Silence. The living room TV played some reality show at low volume. Lila's coffee mug sat on the end table, lipstick stain on the rim, but the coffee was cold. Her purse wasn't on the hook by the door. Mason pulled out his phone and called her cell. Straight to voicemail. "Hey babe, just got home early. Call me back." He tried again 15 minutes later. Same result. By 9:30, genuine concern crept in. Mason had built his reputation in construction on reliability and attention to detail. When something didn't fit, he investigated. Lila was 6 months pregnant with their second child. She didn't just disappear. He called Dr. Morrison's office knowing he'd get the answering service. "Morrison OBGYN, this is Sarah. Hi, this is Mason Doyle. My wife Lila had an appointment tonight around 6:30. She's not home yet and I'm getting worried. Can you tell me what time she left?" A pause. "Let me check our system. Mr. Doyle, I show Lila Doyle's last appointment was 3 weeks ago. She canceled tonight's appointment this morning." Mason's grip tightened on the phone. "That's impossible. She left at 6 saying she was going to Dr. Morrison." "Sir, I'm looking at her file right now. She called at 9:15 a.m. and said she needed to reschedule due to a family emergency." "What family emergency?" "I wouldn't have that information, Mr. Doyle. Is there anything else I can help with?" Mason hung up and stared at the phone. Lila had lied about the appointment, but why? And where was she? He climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Lila's laptop sat open on her dresser, still logged in. Mason had never snooped through her things. Trust had been the foundation of their 15-year marriage. But trust assumed honesty. Her email was open to a conversation thread with someone named A. Wells. The subject line read, "Thursday plans." Mason's blood chilled as he read, "A. Wells. Are you sure Mason doesn't suspect anything? This is getting complicated." Lila, "He's completely clueless. Thinks I'm seeing Morrison twice a week. Just stick to the plan." A. Wells, "I can't keep doing this. The risk is too high." Lila, "Aaron, we've talked about this. You agreed to give up the baby once it's born. Don't back out now." Aaron, Dr. Aaron Wells, Lila's ex-husband from her first marriage. Mason scrolled up through weeks of messages, hotel reservations, times and locations, references to our baby and when Mason finds out and financial security. His hands shook as he opened her calendar app. Under today's date, A. Lakeside, 7 o'clock. Under next Tuesday, due date transfer, legal. Under March 15th, 3 months away, baby arrives. M doesn't know. Mason stumbled backward, his legs hitting the bed. Lila was pregnant with Aaron's child. She'd been lying for months, maybe longer. The prenatal appointments, the doctor visits, the excitement about expanding their family, all lies. But the calendar entry due date transfer suggested something else, something worse. He opened her browser history. Searches for surrogacy laws Illinois, legal parentage transfer, and forged signature detection. In her downloads folder, he found a PDF. Gestational Surrogacy Agreement, Wells Doyle. Mason opened the document with trembling fingers. The agreement stated that Lila Doyle was serving as a gestational surrogate for Aaron Wells, carrying a child conceived through embryo transfer. The intended father was listed as Aaron Wells. The document was signed by all parties, including Mason Doyle. Except Mason had never seen this document before in his life. His signature was perfect. Every loop and curve matched his real signature. But he remembered nothing about signing it. Mason grabbed Lila's phone from the nightstand, thankful she'd never changed her passcode from Callie's birthday. In a hidden folder labeled Legal, he found photos of bank statements showing payments from Aaron to their joint account. $25,000 over 4 months, and below that, a recording app with files labeled by date. He played the most recent one, Lila's voice. He's starting to ask questions about the appointments. Aaron's voice. Maybe we should tell him the truth. Lila. Are you insane? If Mason finds out I'm carrying your baby, he'll divorce me and I'll get nothing. The surrogacy contract ensures I get paid regardless. When the baby's born, you take it, and Mason never has to know it wasn't his. Aaron. And if he wants a paternity test? Lila. He won't. He trusts me completely. Besides, I've been faking pregnancy symptoms with our first child. He'll assume this one is his too. Mason dropped the phone. The room spun around him. Lila had been planning this for months. She'd forged his signature on legal documents, accepted money from her ex-husband, and intended to pass off Aaron's child as his own. If Aaron hadn't wanted the baby, Mason would have raised another man's child his entire life, never knowing the truth. But the worst part was the cold calculation in her voice. She'd used his trust, his love, his desire for another child as weapons against him. Car headlights swept across the bedroom wall. Lila was home. Mason closed the laptop and slipped the phone back where he'd found it. His mind raced through options: confrontation, lawyers, divorce papers. But something darker whispered in his ear. Lila had spent months deceiving him with surgical precision. Maybe it was time to return the favor. He heard the front door open and Lila's voice calling upstairs. Mason, you home early? Yeah, he called back, surprised by how normal his voice sounded. Just got in. How was Dr. Morrison? Oh, same old checkup. Baby's doing great. She appeared in the doorway, still glowing with that pregnancy radiance that had made him fall in love with her all over again 6 months ago. Now it made him sick. Everything okay? She asked, moving to kiss his cheek. You look pale. Mason forced a smile. Long day. Just tired. But as Lila changed into her nightgown, humming softly to herself, Mason was already planning his next move. If his wife wanted to play games with legal documents and hidden truths, she'd pick the wrong opponent. Mason Doyle built his business on foundations that lasted. Tomorrow, he'd start building a foundation that would bury Lila's lies forever. Mason left for work at 6 a.m., 2 hours earlier than usual. Instead of heading to the Riverside Mall site, he drove downtown to the Cook County Records office. His friend, Jake Moretti, worked in property records. They'd gone to high school together, and Jake owed Mason a favor from when Mason had remodeled his kitchen at cost. Mason, what brings you here so early? Jake asked, sipping coffee from a Cubs mug. I need a favor, quietly. Can you pull any documents filed under my wife's name in the last 6 months? Particularly anything legal or medical related? Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, he handed Mason a manila folder. There's a surrogacy agreement filed with the state, a medical power of attorney, and some insurance paperwork. Your signature is on all of them. Mason's jaw tightened as he flipped through the documents. Every signature was perfect. Too perfect. His real signature had subtle variations, a slightly different pressure on the M, a small inconsistency in the D of Doyle. These signatures were photocopied perfection. Jake, who filed these? Looks like they came through attorney Carl Manning's office. You know him? Mason knew Manning by reputation. Expensive, ruthless, and effective. The kind of lawyer you hired when you needed to win at any cost. Thanks, Jake. I owe you. Mason, Jake called as he reached the door. Everything okay at home? Mason paused. Not yet, but it will be. His next stop was Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Aaron Wells practiced. Mason had done construction work there 2 years ago, and still knew people in maintenance and administration. Sarah Chen in HR had been flirting with Mason's foreman during the renovation. A phone call, and 20 minutes later, she met him in the hospital cafeteria. Dr. Wells requested a leave of absence 3 weeks ago, she said quietly. Medical reasons, cancer diagnosis. He's not expected to return. Cancer? Pancreatic. Very aggressive. He's got maybe 4 to 6 months. The pieces clicked into place. Aaron was dying. He'd gotten Lila pregnant, but didn't want to burden a child with a dying father. The surrogacy arrangement let him walk away cleanly while Lila collected payment and passed the baby off as Mason's. Except Aaron was having second thoughts. Mason thanked Sarah and sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot staring at his phone. He could confront Lila now, file for divorce, and walk away. It would be clean, simple, and fair. But fair hadn't been part of Lila's plan when she'd forged his signature and stolen 6 months of his life. Mason drove to Terry's apartment across town. His younger brother worked on Mason's crew and lived in a converted warehouse that Mason had helped him renovate. Terry opened the door in boxers and a Bears t-shirt, squinting against the morning sun. Jesus, Mason, it's not even 8 o'clock. We need to talk. Put on some pants. 10 minutes later, they sat at Terry's kitchen table with coffee and yesterday's donuts. Mason laid out everything: the emails, the surrogacy contract, the forged signatures, Aaron's cancer diagnosis. Terry whistled low. Holy shit, Mason. Lila's been playing you for months. It gets worse. Mason showed him the recording on Lila's phone. Terry's face darkened as he listened to Lila's cold calculation. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet. But I'm done being the victim in this. You want me to have a conversation with Aaron, old-fashioned style? Mason almost smiled. Terry had spent 2 years in county lockup for assault in his 20s. He'd cleaned up his act, but the edge was still there. Not yet, but I might need your help with something else. Mason's phone buzzed. A text from Lila. Working late tonight, don't wait up, love you. He showed Terry the message. She's probably meeting Aaron. I'm going to follow her. Mason, be careful. If she's this manipulative, there's no telling what else she's capable of. That evening, Mason parked across the street from their house and waited. At 7:15, Lila's Honda pulled out of the driveway. Mason followed at a distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel. She drove north on Highway 45, past the mall and the new subdivisions, toward the Lake District, where million-dollar homes sat on private shorelines. Aaron's family had money. His father owned 3 car dealerships in Chicago. Lila turned into a gravel driveway leading to a cedar cabin overlooking the water. Mason parked behind a stand of pine trees and pulled out his phone's camera. Through the cabin windows, he could see Lila and Aaron embracing. Not the embrace of co-conspirators or old friends, the embrace of lovers. Aaron looked thin, gaunt from the cancer treatments. But the way he held Lila, the way she pressed against him, made it clear their relationship was far from over. Mason took photos and started recording video. For 45 minutes, he documented their reunion. Intimate conversations, passionate kisses, Lila's hand on her stomach as Aaron knelt to speak to the baby. The baby he thought was his. At 9:30, Lila kissed Aaron goodbye and walked to her car. Mason started his truck and followed her home, maintaining his distance. She arrived 20 minutes before he did, just enough time to shower and change into pajamas. When Mason walked through the door, she was curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea. How was your day, honey? She asked, looking up with a smile that no longer fooled him. Fine, long. Yours? Oh, doctor's appointment, grocery shopping, picked up Callie from soccer practice. Another lie. Callie was at her friend Madison's house for a sleepover. How's the baby doing? Lila's hand moved to her stomach. Perfect. Doctor, Morrison says everything looks great. Mason nodded and kissed the top of her head, tasting the betrayal in the gesture. I'm going to grab a shower. Upstairs, he transferred the photos and videos from his phone to a secure cloud account. Then he opened his laptop and began researching Detective Elise Carter, whose name he'd seen in the hospital cafeteria's community board as someone who specialized in fraud cases. By the time Lila came to bed, Mason had a plan forming. If she wanted to play legal games with forged documents and hidden truths, he'd play them better. Mason, Lila whispered in the dark, are you awake? Yeah. I love you. You know that, right? Mason stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing slowly, even out into sleep. I know, he whispered back. But love built on lies wasn't love at all. It was just another kind of theft. And Mason Doyle was about to teach his wife that some thefts came with compound interest. Mason met Detective Elise Carter at a diner on the south side of town, far from anywhere Lila might spot them. Carter was younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Doyle, you said this was about document fraud? Mason laid out the evidence methodically. The forged surrogacy contracts, the bank transfers from Aaron, the fake medical appointments. Carter listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. The forgery is pretty clear-cut, she said finally, but the surrogacy angle complicates things. If she genuinely believed she was helping her ex-husband, she's not helping him. Mason showed her the recordings from Lila's phone. She's using both of us. Carter's expression hardened as she listened to Lila's cold calculation. This changes things. We're looking at fraud, identity theft, and potentially extortion, but I need more evidence before I can move forward. What kind of evidence? Financial records showing a pattern of deception, witnesses who can testify to her intent, and we need to confirm the baby's paternity. Mason nodded. How long do I have? She's due in 3 months. If she gives birth and transfers custody to Aaron, this becomes a lot more complicated legally. Family court gets involved, and family court doesn't like to separate babies from their mothers. That afternoon, Mason called attorney Carl Manning's office. Manning had filed the surrogacy documents. He'd either been fooled by Lila or he was part of the conspiracy. Mr. Manning, I understand you filed some paperwork for my wife regarding a surrogacy arrangement. Mr. Doyle, yes. Your wife came in about 4 months ago with those documents. I assumed you discussed everything thoroughly. You assumed? You didn't verify my signature? A pause. Mr. Doyle, your wife presented the documents as fully executed. She said you'd signed them at home because of your work schedule. Is there a problem? There's a big problem. I never signed those documents. I see. I think we need to meet in person. An hour later, Mason sat across from Manning in his downtown office. The lawyer was younger than Mason had expected, maybe 35, with the hungry look of someone building a reputation. Mr. Doyle, if what you're telling me is true, I've been an unwitting party to fraud. Your wife specifically told me you were on board with the surrogacy arrangement. Did she pay your fees in cash? Manning nodded grimly. $2,500. Cash? She said you preferred to keep certain financial transactions private for tax purposes. Another lie. Mason paid his taxes meticulously and kept detailed records of every business expense. Mr. Manning, I want to hire you, but this time I want you working for me. Manning leaned back in his chair. Mr. Doyle, there's a conflict of interest here. I represented your wife in the original matter. You represented someone who lied to you and potentially made you an accessory to fraud. I'd think you'd want to protect yourself. What are you proposing? I want to file for divorce on grounds of fraud and emotional cruelty. I want full custody of my daughter, and I want to make sure Lila doesn't see a penny of my assets or future earnings. Manning was quiet for a long moment. That's aggressive. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state. Proving fraud significant enough to affect property division is difficult. I have recordings, photos, forged documents, and bank records. How difficult is it now? Manning smiled for the first time since Mason had arrived. Not difficult at all. But we need to be strategic. If you move too fast, she might disappear with the baby. If you move too slow, she completes the surrogacy transfer and disappears anyway. What do you recommend? We build an airtight case first. Document everything. Get testimony from witnesses who can speak to her character and your relationship. Then we move fast and hard when she least expects it. That evening, Mason called his father. Eric Doyle was 72, a retired union electrician who taught Mason that a man's word was his bond and that betrayal was the unforgivable sin. Dad, I need to talk to you and Callie. Together. Tonight. What's wrong, son? Everything. An hour later, Mason sat at his father's kitchen table with Callie and Eric. His daughter was 14, old enough to understand adult problems, but young enough to be devastated by them. Mason chose his words carefully. Callie, you know your mom is pregnant. Yeah, with my little brother or sister. The baby isn't mine. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Callie's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, anger. What do you mean? Mason explained the situation in terms she could understand. Her mother had lied, forged documents, and was carrying another man's baby while pretending it was Mason's. Callie started crying. Mom wouldn't do that. She loves you. Eric reached across the table and took his granddaughter's hand. Callie, sometimes people we love disappoint us. It doesn't mean we stop loving them, but it means we have to protect ourselves. Are you getting divorced? Callie asked. Probably, but that doesn't change anything between you and me. You're my daughter, and I'll always be your father. What about the baby? Mason struggled with that question. The baby isn't my responsibility, but that's not the baby's fault. Callie wiped her eyes. I hate her. I hate her for lying to you. Don't hate her, Callie, but don't trust her either. And if she asks you questions about what I'm doing or where I'm going, you don't have to answer. Eric walked Mason to his truck afterward. Son, what's your next move? I'm going to destroy her. Legally, financially, socially. She used me, Dad. She forged my name and stole months of my life. Eric nodded slowly. Your mother, God rest her soul, used to say that revenge was like digging two graves. But sometimes, son, the other person starts digging first. The next morning, Mason called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead, he drove to Northwestern Memorial and waited in the parking garage until Aaron Wells arrived for his chemotherapy appointment. Aaron looked worse than he had in the photos. Thinner, paler, moving like every step caused pain. Mason followed him into the hospital and waited until Aaron was alone in the oncology waiting room. Dr. Wells? Aaron looked up, and Mason saw recognition and fear flash across his face. You're Mason Doyle. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea. Mason sat down anyway. Aaron, you're dying. I get that. And you got my wife pregnant. I'm still processing that. But what I can't understand is why you thought it was okay to forge my signature on legal documents. I never forged anything. The surrogacy contract has my signature on it. I never signed it. Aaron's face went white. Lila said you'd agreed to everything. She said you wanted to help but preferred to keep your involvement private. Did you really believe that? Or did you just want to believe it? Aaron closed his eyes. I'm dying, Mason. I have maybe 4 months left. Lila came to me and said she wanted to give me a child before I died. A part of me that would continue after I'm gone. And when the baby's born, I was supposed to take the baby and raise it, but I can't do that now. I'm too sick. The treatments aren't working. Mason felt something cold settle in his chest. So, what's the plan now, Aaron? Lila says you'll make a good father. Better than I ever could have been. Lila says a lot of things. Most of them are lies. Aaron opened his eyes and looked at Mason directly. What are you going to do? Mason stood up. I'm going to give you a choice, Aaron. You can cooperate with my divorce attorney and testify that Lila deceived both of us. Or you can try to protect her and go down with her when the fraud charges hit. And if I cooperate, I'll make sure your last few months are comfortable. You can die with some dignity. And if I don't? Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. Then I'll make sure your last few months are very, very difficult. Aaron nodded slowly. I'll cooperate. As Mason walked back to his truck, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. The man who'd walked into that hospital had been a victim, reactive and emotional. The man walking out was something else entirely. Lila had taught him that trust was a weapon that could be used against you. Now, it was time to teach her what happened when that weapon was turned around. Mason spent the next week in careful preparation. He hired a private investigator to document Lila's continued meetings with Aaron. He had Detective Carter run background checks on both Lila and Aaron, looking for patterns of deception. And he worked with Carl Manning to prepare legal documents that would freeze their assets and secure emergency custody of Callie. But first, he wanted to give Lila one last chance to tell the truth. On Thursday evening, Mason suggested they invite both sets of parents over for dinner on Saturday, a celebration of the coming baby and their family unity. Lila agreed enthusiastically, apparently touched by his gesture. Friday night, Mason called Aaron. I'm having a family dinner tomorrow night. Lila's parents, my father, our daughter. I want you there. Mason, I don't think it wasn't a request, Aaron. You want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Aaron sighed. What time? Saturday evening, Mason grilled steaks on the back patio while Lila entertained their guests in the living room. Rachel Brennan, Lila's mother, held court with stories about her own pregnancies. She'd always treated Mason as slightly beneath her daughter. He was blue-collar, after all, not professional class like Aaron had been. Eric Doyle listened politely but kept shooting Mason questioning glances. Callie sat quietly, picking at her food, still processing everything Mason had told her. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Lila looked up, confused. Are we expecting someone else? Mason went to answer it. Aaron stood on the front porch, looking like death warmed over but dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt. Aaron? Lila's voice was sharp with panic. What are you doing here? I invited him, Mason said calmly. I thought our family dinner should include everyone who's really family. Rachel Brennan looked between Aaron and Lila with growing suspicion. Lila, what's going on? Mason returned to the dining room and connected his laptop to the big screen TV. I wanted to share some photos from Lila's pregnancy. Document this special time in our lives. The first image appeared on screen. Lila and Aaron embracing at the lakeside cabin. Lila shot to her feet. Mason, don't! Sit down! His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. The next image. Aaron's hand on Lila's pregnant belly, both of them smiling intimately. Rachel gasped. Lila, what is this? I can explain. Mason clicked to the next image. A bank statement showing Aaron's payments to their joint account. $25,000, Mason said conversationally. Payment for services rendered. Eric Doyle set down his fork. Son, what's going on here? Mason clicked to the surrogacy contract. This document states that my wife is carrying Aaron's baby as a surrogate. It has my signature on it, agreeing to the arrangement. He looked directly at Lila. Except I never signed it. Lila's face had gone white. Mason, please, let me explain. Oh, you will explain. Mason clicked to the audio player. But first, let's hear you explain it to Aaron. Lila's recorded voice filled the room. If Mason finds out I'm carrying your baby, he'll divorce me and I'll get nothing. The surrogacy contract ensures I get paid regardless. When the baby's born, you take it, and Mason never has to know it wasn't his. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel stared at her daughter in horror. Lila, tell me this isn't true. Mom, I can explain everything. You forged my signature, Mason said quietly. You took money from your ex-husband to carry his baby, and you were going to let me raise another man's child for the rest of my life, never knowing the truth. Callie stood up abruptly. I'm going to my room. She looked at her mother with disgust. I can't even look at you. Aaron cleared his throat. Maybe I should go. Sit down, Aaron. Mason's voice cracked like a whip. You're part of this too. Rachel turned on Aaron. How could you do this to Mason? He's a good man. Mrs. Brennan, I thought Mason knew. Lila told me. Lila told you what you wanted to hear, Mason interrupted. Because you're both selfish cowards who thought you could use me to clean up your mess. Eric stood up slowly. Son, I think we should call the police. Already handled, Dad. Detective Carter will be pressing charges Monday morning. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. Lila finally found her voice. Mason, please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. You love my paycheck. You love my stability. You love the fact that I'm stupid enough to trust you. Mason clicked to the final image, a DNA test authorization form. But you don't love me enough to tell me the truth. What is that? Court-ordered paternity testing. We'll know within 48 hours whether that baby is mine or Aaron's. You can't do that without my consent. Mason smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I can when there's evidence of fraud. Judge Martinez signed the order yesterday. Rachel looked around the room desperately. There has to be some explanation, some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Eric said grimly, is that Lila thought she could get away with it. Aaron stood up shakily. I should leave. This is between you and Lila now. Nothing is between me and Lila anymore, Mason said. Our marriage ended the day she forged my signature. Lila started crying. Mason, please. The baby needs a father. The baby has a father. He's sitting right there. Mason pointed at Aaron. What the baby doesn't need is a mother who's a liar and a thief. I'm not giving up my baby. That's not your choice anymore. Mason shut off the TV and closed his laptop. I've filed for emergency custody based on your fraudulent behavior. Carl Manning thinks we have an excellent chance. Rachel finally spoke, her voice hollow. Lila, is all of this true? Lila looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Her mother's horror, Aaron's guilt, Eric's disgust, and Mason's cold fury. I never meant for it to happen this way. But it did happen this way, Mason said. And now you get to live with the consequences. He walked to the front door and held it open. I think this dinner party is over. Aaron left first, moving like a man walking to his own execution. Rachel followed, unable to meet Mason's eyes. At the door, she turned back. Mason, please don't destroy my daughter over this. Your daughter destroyed herself. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. After they left, Mason found Lila sitting at the kitchen table, still crying. Pack a bag, he said quietly. You can stay at your mother's while the lawyers sort this out. This is my house too. Not anymore. The restraining order goes into effect Monday morning. Lila looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. You're really going to destroy our entire life over this? Mason sat down across from her. Lila, our entire life was already destroyed. You destroyed it the day you decided I was stupid enough to raise another man's child. I thought you'd never find out. I know. That's what makes it unforgivable. She went upstairs to pack, and Mason sat alone in his kitchen, listening to her footsteps above. 15 years of marriage, reduced to the sound of suitcase zippers and closing drawers. When she came back down, she looked at him one more time. I really did love you, Mason. No, he said quietly. You loved what I could give you. There's a difference. After she left, Mason poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on his back patio, looking out at the yard where he'd imagined teaching his son to throw a football. His phone buzzed. A text from Terry. How did it go? Mason typed back, Phase 1 complete. Because this wasn't the end of Lila's punishment. This was just the beginning. Monday morning brought Detective Carter to Mason's door with a warrant for Lila's arrest. Fraud in the first degree, identity theft, and conspiracy. Bond was set at $50,000. Money Lila didn't have since Mason had already frozen their joint accounts. She spent 3 days in county lockup before Rachel could scrape together the bail money. Carl Manning moved with surgical precision. Emergency custody hearing for Callie? Granted. Restraining order preventing Lila from entering the marital home? Granted. Forensic accounting audit of all financial records? Ordered by the court. But the real blow came when Manning filed a civil lawsuit against both Lila and Aaron for damages. Fraud. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Conspiracy to defraud. The amount? $2 million. $2 million? Mason asked, sitting in Manning's office. Your construction business is worth about $800,000. Your house is worth $350,000. Your emotional distress, loss of consortium, and punitive damages make up the rest. Aaron's malpractice insurance will cover his portion if we can prove professional misconduct. Can we? He used his medical practice to facilitate the deception. Had Lila pose as a patient to maintain the lie. That's grounds for losing his medical license, even posthumously. Mason nodded. Aaron was dying anyway, but the medical board investigation would destroy his reputation and eliminate any pension benefits for his estate. Well, what about Lila? She'll be bankrupted. No assets, no income, legal bills she can't pay, and a fraud conviction that makes her unemployable in any position requiring trust. Good. Manning raised an eyebrow at Mason's cold tone, but said nothing. The paternity test results came back Wednesday. Aaron Wells was the biological father. Mason felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, just cold satisfaction that his instincts had been correct. Thursday, Lila violated the restraining order. Mason was at work when his phone rang. Callie, sobbing. Dad, Mom's at my school. She's trying to take me home. Where are you now? The principal's office. They won't let her take me, but she's screaming at everyone. I'm on my way. Mason arrived at Lincoln High School to find 2 police cars in the parking lot. Through the principal's office window, he could see Lila gesticulating wildly at Principal Henderson, while Officer Rodriguez tried to calm her down. Mr. Doyle? Officer Rodriguez stepped outside. Your wife violated the restraining order. We're taking her into custody. Is Callie okay? Shaken up, but fine. Your wife was demanding to take her home, claiming you'd kidnapped her. Mason watched as they led Lila away in handcuffs. She saw him through the window and screamed something he couldn't hear. Dad? Callie appeared beside him, her face puffy from crying. It's okay, sweetheart. She can't hurt you now. That violation sent Lila back to county lockup for 10 days. Judge Martinez was not amused by defendants who ignored court orders. Meanwhile, Mason's private investigator had been busy. A background check revealed that Lila had pulled similar schemes before. Not fraud exactly, but a pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation. Her first marriage to Aaron had ended when she'd run up $50,000 in credit card debt without telling him. She has a type, the PI reported. Stable men with money and low self-esteem. She builds them up, makes them dependent on her approval, then bleeds them dry. What about Aaron? Clean, mostly. The cancer diagnosis is real, prognosis is real, but he's not as broke as he pretended. Family trust fund, life insurance policies, investment accounts. The man's worth about $3 million? Mason felt something click into place. She wasn't just carrying his baby. She was positioning herself to inherit everything when he dies. That's my read. Widow with his child, grieving and sympathetic. She'd have gotten everything. Not anymore. Friday afternoon, Manning called with news. Aaron's agreed to change his will. Everything goes to a children's cancer research foundation. The baby gets a trust fund for college, but Lila gets nothing. How did you convince him? I didn't have to. Turns out Aaron's had his own doubts about Lila's motives. The fraud charges and the recordings pushed him over the edge. Where does that leave us? In a very strong position. Lila's facing criminal charges, civil damages she can't pay, and complete financial ruin. The divorce will be finalized within 60 days. But Mason wasn't satisfied with legal victories. He wanted Lila to understand what betrayal felt like from the inside. That weekend, he drove to Aaron's lakeside cabin. Aaron answered the door looking like a ghost, hollow-eyed, skeletal, barely able to stand. Mason, what are you doing here? We need to talk about the cabin. What about it? Mason handed him a manila envelope. Notice of foreclosure. You're 3 months behind on the mortgage payments. Aaron opened the envelope with shaking hands. I don't understand. The payments are automatic. Were automatic. Until Lila convinced you to change the account number. She's been skimming the mortgage payments for months. Aaron sank into a chair. She said she was helping me organize my finances before I died. She was organizing them all right, into her pockets. What happens now? The bank forecloses in 30 days unless someone pays the back payments plus penalties. About $45,000? Aaron's laugh was bitter. I don't have $45,000 liquid. Everything's tied up in treatments and legal fees. Mason pulled out his checkbook. I do. Why would you help me? I'm not helping you. I'm buying the cabin at the foreclosure auction, but I thought you should know. Aaron stared at him. You're going to buy my family's cabin? I'm going to buy it, yes. What I do with it after that depends on how cooperative you are in the divorce proceedings. I've already agreed to testify. Testifying isn't enough anymore, Aaron. I want you to call Lila. Tell her you want to reconcile, work things out, set up a meeting. Mason, I'm dying. I don't have the energy for games. Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. You had energy to screw my wife. You had energy to forge documents and steal 6 months of my life. Find some energy for this. Aaron closed his eyes. What do you want me to say? Tell her you've changed your mind about the baby. You want to raise it yourself. Tell her you need to see her one more time before you die. And then you record everything she says. Every lie, every manipulation, every admission of guilt. The cabin? If you cooperate, I'll deed it back to you. You can die in your family home. And if I don't? Mason stood up. Then you die knowing the place where you spent every summer of your childhood belongs to the man whose life you helped destroy. Aaron nodded slowly. I'll make the call. That evening, Mason sat in his truck across from the cabin, watching through binoculars as Lila arrived for her meeting with Aaron. She looked haggard. 10 days in lockup had taken their toll. Mason had given Aaron a recording device and coached him on what to say. The goal was to get Lila to admit that she'd planned the entire scheme from the beginning, that she'd never intended to be honest with Mason about the baby's paternity. Through his earpiece, Mason listened as Aaron played his part perfectly. Lila, I've been thinking. Maybe we should be together. Raise the baby as a family. Aaron, you're dying, and Mason already knows everything. Mason knows what we told him. He doesn't know about the cabin. He doesn't know about the other payments. A pause. What other payments? The life insurance policy I took out with you as beneficiary. The stocks I transferred to your name. The trust fund I set up for you. Mason smiled grimly. There were no other payments, no life insurance, no trust fund. But Lila's greed would make her believe it. Aaron, you never told me about any of that. I wanted to surprise you. A nest egg for after I'm gone, but if Mason's being vindictive, maybe we should accelerate our plans. What do you mean? Marry me, Lila. This weekend. We can fly to Vegas, get married, and secure everything legally before the divorce is finalized. Mason could hear the excitement in Lila's voice. Are you serious? Dead serious, no pun intended. But there's something I need to know first. What? Did you ever love Mason, or was he always just the mark? Lila's laugh was cold and calculating. Aaron, Mason's a sweet man, but he was always the safety net. Someone stable to fall back on if our plan didn't work. I mean, did you really think I'd choose a construction worker over a doctor if I had a real choice? So you never intended to stay married to him? God, no. The plan was always to wait until you died, inherit everything, then divorce Mason and take half his assets too. Double security. And the baby? Insurance policy. If something went wrong with the inheritance, at least I'd have your child to guarantee support payments. Mason had heard enough. Lila had just confessed to a pattern of fraud that went far beyond what they'd originally suspected. She'd never loved him, never intended to honor their marriage vows, and had planned to destroy his life from the very beginning. He called Detective Carter. I've got everything you need for the conspiracy charges. The next morning, Carter arrested Lila again, this time for conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree, a felony carrying a minimum sentence of 3 years in state prison. At the arraignment, Lila's court-appointed attorney tried to argue for bail, but Judge Martinez had run out of patience. Miss Brennan, you've violated restraining orders, committed fraud, and now we have evidence of an ongoing conspiracy to defraud multiple victims. Bail is denied. You'll remain in custody until trial. Mason watched from the gallery as they led Lila away. She turned to look at him one last time, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Genuine fear. She was beginning to understand that Mason Doyle wasn't the forgiving, trusting man she'd married. That man was gone, replaced by someone much more dangerous, someone who played by her rules. 3 weeks later, Aaron Wells died in his sleep at Northwestern Memorial. The cancer had moved faster than anyone expected. His funeral was small, attended mostly by medical colleagues and a few distant relatives. Lila requested permission to attend from county lockup. Judge Martinez denied it. Aaron's death changed the dynamic of Mason's revenge. The man was beyond punishment now, but his estate remained vulnerable. Manning filed claims against Aaron's estate for his role in the fraud, seeking damages that would prevent Lila from inheriting anything. But Mason had a more personal form of justice in mind. He used his construction company to renovate Aaron's lakeside cabin, which he'd acquired at the foreclosure auction for $60,000, half its market value. The renovations weren't improvements, though. They were erasure. Every trace of Aaron's family history was stripped away. Family photos, furniture, personal items, everything went into a dumpster. Mason had the walls torn down to the studs, the floors ripped up, the bathroom gutted. When he was finished, he sold the property to a developer who planned to tear down the cabin and build condominiums. Aaron's childhood home, where 5 generations of his family had spent summers, would become lakeshore luxury condos, starting at $400,000. That seems excessive, Terry said, watching the demolition crew work. Aaron helped her steal 6 months of my life, Mason replied. I'm returning the favor. But Lila was his primary target, and Mason had saved the best for last. He hired a different private investigator to contact everyone in Lila's social circle, her book club, her church group, her former nursing colleagues, the other soccer moms from Callie's school. The PI posed as a journalist, writing about fraud cases, and asked if they'd heard about Lila's situation. Within a week, everyone in town knew that sweet, pregnant Lila Doyle was actually a manipulative fraud who'd betrayed her husband with her dying ex-husband. The social ostracism was immediate and complete. Lila's former friends crossed the street to avoid her mother. The church asked Rachel to step down from the women's auxiliary. The book club canceled their meetings rather than deal with the drama. But Mason's masterstroke came when he discovered that Lila had been skimming money from the church's charity fund. As treasurer of the food pantry committee, Lila had access to the account that funded meals for homeless families. Over 18 months, she'd transferred nearly $8,000 to personal accounts, covering the transfers with fake receipts and fraudulent documentation. Mason presented this evidence to Father McKenna, who called the police immediately. The charity fraud charges carried an additional penalty. Lila would have to make full restitution to the church, plus serve 200 hours of community service if convicted. She doesn't have $8,000, Manning pointed out. I know, Mason said, that's the point. The combined weight of all charges, marriage fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, charity fraud, and violation of restraining orders, meant Lila was facing 12 to 15 years in state prison. Her court-appointed attorney came to Manning with a plea bargain. Lila would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 5 years with parole eligibility in 3. Recommend against it, Mason told Manning. Mason, 5 years is a significant punishment. She'll lose everything, her reputation, her freedom, her relationship with Callie. Not enough. What would be enough? Mason thought about the question seriously. I want her to understand what it feels like to have someone you trust destroy your entire life. Manning was quiet for a moment. Mason, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? Revenge has a way of consuming people. She consumed me first. The plea hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Lila would appear before Judge Martinez and formally admit to defrauding her husband, her church, and the state of Illinois. Wednesday night, Mason made his final move. He visited Lila in county lockup, his first face-to-face conversation with her since the dinner party 3 months earlier. She looked terrible. Jail had stripped away the polished veneer she'd maintained for 15 years. Her hair was greasy, her skin sallow, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost 30 pounds. Mason, she said, sitting across from him in the visitation room. Thank you for coming. I didn't come to reconcile, Lila. I know, I just wanted to see you one more time before tomorrow. How's jail treating you? Her laugh was bitter. About as well as you'd expect. Turns out other inmates don't like women who steal from churches. I imagine not. Mason, I need you to know, I really did love you. Maybe not the way you deserved, but in my own way. Your own way involved forging my signature and planning to steal my life savings. I was scared. Aaron was dying, and I didn't know what would happen to me and the baby. So you decided to make it my problem. Lila started crying. I made a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. But does that really justify destroying my entire life? Mason leaned back in his chair. Lila, you destroyed your own life the day you decided I was too stupid to notice your lies. What about forgiveness? What about second chances? You had 15 years of chances. You chose to use them for fraud. What about the baby? Your son or daughter needs a mother. The baby isn't mine. And you're not mother material. Lila's tears stopped. Something hard flickered in her eyes. You bastard! You self-righteous bastard! You act like you're so perfect, but you're just as vindictive as I am. The difference is I'm vindictive to people who deserve it. I hope you're satisfied when I'm rotting in prison. Mason stood up. I will be. As he walked toward the exit, Lila called after him. You'll regret this, Mason. Someday you'll regret destroying the mother of your child. Mason turned back. That baby isn't my child, Lila, and you're not its mother. You're just the vessel that carried it. The next morning, Lila pled guilty to all charges. Judge Martinez sentenced her to 8 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 4 years. Miss Brennan, the judge said, your actions represent a profound betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of our social fabric. You defrauded your husband, your church, and the people who depended on your charity work. The sentence reflects not just the monetary damages, but the emotional and spiritual damage you've caused. Lila was led away in shackles. She didn't look back. Mason sat in the gallery next to Callie, who had insisted on attending. Is it over now, Dad? She asked. It's over. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Mason felt something unexpected. Emptiness. For 3 months, his life had been consumed by the need for revenge. Now that it was complete, he wasn't sure what came next. Dad? Callie took his arm. Are you okay? Mason looked down at his daughter. Smart, strong, and unscarred by her mother's betrayals because he'd protected her from the worst of it. I'm fine, sweetheart. Let's go home. 6 months later, Mason stood in the nursery he'd never finished, holding a court document that would change 2 lives forever. The baby, a boy, had been born 3 weeks premature while Lila was in county lockup awaiting sentencing. Social services had taken custody immediately, and the child was placed in foster care while the courts sorted out parental rights. Aaron was dead, Lila was in prison, and Mason held termination papers that would sever any legal connection between himself and the child. You don't have to sign those, Manning said. The boy isn't biologically yours, but you could petition for adoption if you wanted. Mason stared at the papers. The baby had done nothing wrong. He was an innocent victim of his parents' selfishness and lies. What kind of life would he have in the system? Hard to say. He's healthy, and infant adoptions usually work out well, but there are no guarantees. Mason thought about Callie, how she'd asked about her baby brother for weeks after Lila's arrest. How she'd been excited about teaching him to throw a baseball and helping him with homework. What's his name? Baby Doe #47. The foster family calls him Michael. Mason signed the termination papers with a steady hand. Make sure he goes to a good family, people who'll love him. I'll make some calls. A week later, Manning called with news. There's a couple in Springfield, both teachers, married 10 years, been trying to adopt for 3. They want to meet Michael. Good. Mason, are you sure about this? Mason looked around the nursery. Crib, changing table, rocking chair, all gathering dust. He'd built this room for a son who was never really his. I'm sure. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October. Lila had been in prison for 4 months, and Mason was officially a single man again. He celebrated by tearing down the nursery and converting it into a home office. Callie adjusted better than expected. She'd started seeing a counselor, someone who specialized in helping children cope with parental betrayal. The sessions seemed to help. She was less angry now, more focused on rebuilding her relationship with Mason. Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again? She asked one evening over dinner. Maybe someday. Why? I just want you to be happy. I am happy, Callie. Are you? You seem different since Mom left. Mason considered the question. He was different. The trusting, forgiving man who'd built a life with Lila was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Different how? Colder. Like you don't trust anyone anymore. She wasn't wrong. Mason had learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. People would lie, cheat, and betray you if it served their purposes. The key was to protect yourself before they got the chance. Trust has to be earned, sweetheart. Your mother taught me that. But you can't live your whole life suspecting everyone. I can live my life being careful about who I let in. A year after Lila's sentencing, Mason received a letter from her in prison. He almost threw it away unopened, but Curiosity won. Mason, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to try one more time to explain. I was scared and desperate when I made those choices. Aaron was dying, and I didn't know how I'd survive without him. You were safe, stable, and I thought I could make it work without hurting anyone. I never meant for you to find out. I thought I could give Aaron a child, secure my future, and keep our family together. I know that sounds selfish now, but it made sense at the time. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I did love you, in my own broken way. You were a good husband, and I was a terrible wife. Take care of Callie. She's the best thing either of us ever did. Lila Mason read the letter twice, then fed it into his paper shredder. 2 years later, he was working late in his home office when Callie knocked on the door. Dad, there's someone here to see you. A woman stood in the living room, mid-30s, auburn hair, kind eyes. She held the hand of a 2-year-old boy with dark hair and curious eyes. Mr. Doyle, I'm Sarah Chen. This is Michael, the boy who should have been his son. We wanted to thank you, Sarah continued. Michael's adoption attorney told us you could have made things difficult, but you put his welfare first. Mason knelt to the boy's level. Michael looked at him with Aaron's eyes, but showed no fear, only the natural wariness of a toddler meeting a stranger. How is he? Perfect. Happy, healthy, smart as a whip. He's going to be a heartbreaker when he grows up. Mason felt something loosen in his chest. Not regret exactly, but a kind of peace. This child would grow up loved, protected, and ignorant of the circumstances of his birth. That's good. That's really good. Sarah hesitated. Mr. Doyle, if you ever want to see him... No. Mason stood up. He's your son now. That's how it should be. After they left, Callie found Mason standing in the backyard looking at the stars. Are you okay, Dad? Yeah, I think I am. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom hadn't lied? If the baby really was yours? Mason considered the question. Sometimes, but wondering doesn't change anything. Do you miss her? I miss who I thought she was, but that person never really existed. Callie took his hand. I'm glad you found out the truth. Why? Because now I know you'll never lie to me like that. Mason squeezed her hand. Never. They stood in comfortable silence, father and daughter, survivors of a betrayal that had nearly destroyed their family, but ultimately made them stronger. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the Illinois prairie, a sound of journey, of movement, of leaving the past behind. Mason had learned that some betrayals were unforgivable, that some lies were too deep to overcome, and that some people would destroy your life without a second thought if it served their purposes. But he'd also learned that survival wasn't just about enduring the betrayal. It was about making sure the betrayer understood the true cost of their choices. Lila had 6 more years to think about that cost in her prison cell, and Mason had the rest of his life to make sure he never forgot the lessons she'd taught him about the difference between love and trust, between forgiveness and justice, and between being a victim and being a survivor. The concrete lies had been broken, ground to dust, and swept away. What remained was the truth, solid as bedrock and twice as permanent. 5 years after Lila's sentencing, Mason received notification that she was eligible for parole. She'd served the minimum sentence with good behavior and completed anger management courses. The parole board asked if he wanted to provide a victim impact statement. Mason declined. He'd said everything he needed to say in that courthouse years ago. Lila's punishment was between her and the state now. Callie was 19, studying engineering at the University of Illinois. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, strong, independent, and skeptical of easy promises. Lila's betrayal had taught her valuable lessons about trust and self-reliance. Are you worried about Mom getting out? She asked during one of their weekly phone calls. No, she's not my problem anymore. What if she tries to contact us? Then we'll deal with it. But I don't think she will. Prison changes people. Mason had changed too. His construction business had grown into one of the most successful firms in central Illinois. He'd never remarried, though he dated occasionally, women who understood that his trust came slowly and had to be earned daily. He'd built a good life on the foundation of his mother's betrayal, not despite it, but because of it. The lesson was simple. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And when they try to destroy your life, make sure they understand the consequences. Concrete lies could be broken, but the truth endures forever.